He said it was a joke when he pushed me, but my wrist still hurts, and my pride hurts even more. By nightfall, he was sitting at my dinner table, smiling, unaware of what waited for him. The kitchen was warm that afternoon, filled with the smell of simmering broth and fried onions. I had been preparing dinner since noon, moving slowly, carefully, the way mothers do when they want to make everything perfect for their children. The sunlight from the window touched the floor in long golden strips. It was an ordinary scene, comforting and familiar, until he walked in. His steps were quick, sharp, and careless, as if this house belonged to him alone. I turned slightly to make space for him, expecting simple politeness. Instead, he placed a hand on my arm and without a word, pushed me aside. It wasn't a gentle nudge. My wrist hit the edge of the counter. The pain was instant, not unbearable, but shocking. I stood frozen for a moment, more stunned by the disrespect than the impact. He didn't turn around. He didn't apologize. He didn't even pause. He reached for a glass, filled it with water, and took a slow sip as if nothing had happened. My daughter stood near the doorway. She looked at me with wide, helpless eyes, like a child watching something she could not stop. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. He set the glass down and looked at me with a lazy half-smile. "You should try staying out of the way," he said. "This is a narrow house." His voice carried no softness, no regret, just mockery. I felt something heavy settle inside my chest. I had always imagined that my daughter's husband would be respectful, a partner who would make her life easier, not harder. Yet in that moment, he seemed like a stranger who had walked through our door wearing a familiar name. I didn't answer him. I didn't trust my voice. I simply continued stirring the pot, pretending the pain in my wrist didn't burn beneath the skin. He laughed under his breath as he left the room. The sound lingered like a stain. I stared at the place where he had been standing, trying to swallow the humiliation. The room was silent, yet filled with unspoken things. I could feel my daughter watching me, her heartbeat almost visible in her throat. She was torn between two loyalties: the man she had chosen and the mother who had raised her. When he was gone, she stepped closer. "Mama," she whispered. Her voice was thin, afraid. I didn't look at her at first. I didn't want her to see my eyes. I was afraid she would see how deeply it had hurt me. When I finally turned, she flinched, as if she expected anger. But there was no anger on my face, only disappointment and something darker, something heavier. I lifted my sleeve and saw the mark already forming. A purple bruise, small but sharp. Her eyes widened. She reached out, then pulled her hand back as if touching me would burn. "I'm fine," I said quietly. But my voice felt strange, unfamiliar. The room felt smaller than before. The walls seemed to lean inward, closer, trapping the air. I walked to the sink, washed my hands, and dried them slowly. My daughter stood near me, silent, unsure. Finally, she spoke again, almost pleading. "Please don't make trouble. He didn't mean it. He gets frustrated." I looked at her carefully. She was defending him, but not because she believed in him. She was defending him because she feared him. I recognized that fear. It was the same fear I had lived with when I was young, the fear of a man who believed he could do anything and get away with it. I had escaped that life once. I had promised myself I would never allow it back into my home. I touched her cheek gently. "A man who loves you doesn't push your mother," I said. She blinked rapidly, but didn't speak. There were secrets in her silence. I could feel them, things she had not told me, things she carried alone. For a moment I wanted to ask. I wanted her to open every door inside her heart and let the truth spill out, but she wasn't ready, and I understood. The sun moved lower, and the house grew darker. I finished cooking, though I barely tasted anything. When I went to my room that evening, I sat on the edge of the bed and held my wrist. The bruise had deepened, a dark reminder beneath my skin. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't the pain of the impact that hurt me. It was the pain of being treated as if I didn't matter, as if I was old, invisible, something to be moved aside. I had given my life to this family. I had raised my daughter with love, with sacrifice. And now I lived in a house where a man believed he could place hands on me without consequence. Something changed inside me that night. A quiet shift, but unmistakable. I felt it like a door opening in the dark. I would not spend my days shrinking to make space for someone who did not respect me. I would not be silent for the sake of peace. Peace built on fear is not peace. It is a prison. I lay down slowly, listening to the house settling around me. My daughter moved softly in the hallway. He spoke loudly in the next room, his voice full of impatience, full of himself. I did not sleep immediately. Instead, I thought. I planned. The humiliation became fuel. I had no intention of screaming or fighting. My revenge would be quiet, careful, and deeply earned. I knew he would return to the kitchen. I knew he would sit at my table again, expecting obedience, expecting silence. Let him come, I thought. Let him laugh again. Let him believe he still held power. He had no idea what I was capable of. And I didn't tell anyone what I intended to do. He said it was a joke when he pushed me. But my wrist still hurts, and my pride hurts even more. By nightfall, he was sitting at my dinner table, smiling, unaware of what waited for him. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, as I always did. Habit is stubborn, even when your heart is bruised. I lay for a moment, listening to the quiet of the house. It should have felt peaceful, but it didn't. The silence felt tense, like the air just before a storm. I traced the outline of the bruise with my fingers, then pulled my sleeve down and stood up. I had already decided. Today, I would pretend nothing had happened, but inside, nothing was the same. I went to the kitchen, turned on the stove, and started breakfast. The familiar sounds of clinking dishes and boiling water steadied me. I moved slowly, deliberately. To anyone watching, it would look like a normal morning, but every motion carried weight. Every stir of the spoon, every plate I set on the table felt like a quiet rehearsal for something bigger. As the tea brewed, I caught my reflection in the small window above the sink. I looked tired, older than I remembered, but my eyes were different. They were not the eyes of a woman who had accepted her fate. They were watching, waiting. My daughter came into the kitchen with small, careful steps. She greeted me softly, barely lifting her eyes. "Good morning, Mama," she said. I studied her face. There were no visible marks on her skin, but there was a heaviness in her expression, a way her shoulders curved inwards. I placed a cup of tea in front of her. "Did you sleep?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." I knew she was lying, but I didn't push. The space between us was fragile. She was still wrapped in fear, and fear makes people protect their abusers more than themselves. I understood that more than I wanted to admit. For a few hours, the house remained ours. Just me and her. I cleaned the table, swept the floor, folded laundry. She moved around like a ghost, doing small tasks, always checking the time, always listening for his steps. I saw how she reacted whenever a motorcycle passed outside, or a door shut somewhere on the street. Her body tensed, then relaxed when she realized it wasn't him. That was when I knew what he did to me was not a single moment. It was part of a pattern, a chain, and my daughter had been carrying it alone. He arrived in the afternoon, as he often did, with the same arrogance that filled the doorway before he did. I heard the gate slam, the jingle of his keys, the sound of his shoes on the floor. My daughter's hands froze around the dish she was drying. I touched her arm gently. "Go sit," I murmured. "I'll handle it." She looked at me, unsure, then obeyed. I straightened my back, wiped my hands, and went to the living room. As he walked in, he entered like a king returning to his throne. His eyes scanned the room, as though everything inside it existed for his convenience. "You're home early," I said calmly. He shrugged, tossing his keys on the table. "I felt like it," he replied. He glanced at my face, then at my hands, searching for weakness. My expression remained neutral. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing how deeply his push had left a mark. He stepped closer and placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing just a little too hard. To anyone else, it might look like an affectionate gesture. To me, it was a warning. "You're quiet today," he said, his breath close to my ear. I forced a small smile. "I'm just tired," I answered. He smirked, as if he had won a game only he was playing. "You old people get tired so easily." He walked past me and flopped onto the sofa, grabbing the remote. I stood there for a moment, steadying my breathing, then turned back to the kitchen. I prepared tea and snacks, carrying the tray out with the same care I always did. My hands did not shake. That was important to me. When I placed the tray in front of him, he watched me too closely. His eyes followed every movement, measuring me. "You're not upset about yesterday, are you?" he asked suddenly. My daughter, sitting in the corner, stiffened. My heart thudded once, hard, but I kept my face calm. "Good. I thought you were going to make a scene. Sensitive people always exaggerate." He took a sip of tea and leaned back, satisfied, like a man who believed he had already won. Dinner was louder than the rest of the day. He dominated the table with his voice, bragging about his job, his money, his importance. He spoke of people who respected him, feared him, obeyed him. He exaggerated his successes, mocked those who had less. I listened, nodding when needed, saying very little. Inside, I felt like I was standing in the center of a burning room, watching the flames, planning my path out. He didn't realize that the more he talked, the more he revealed the kind of man he truly was. Not just to me, but to my daughter, who watched him with tired, hollow eyes. My daughter barely ate. She pushed food around her plate, her fingers trembling around her fork. I noticed everything. The way she flinched when his voice rose, the way she avoided his gaze, the way she seemed to shrink whenever he moved suddenly. She was not a wife sitting beside her husband. She was a prisoner beside her captor. I wanted to reach across the table and pull her away from him, shield her like I did when she was small, but that would not free her. That would only start a war I wasn't ready to fight without weapons. When dinner ended, I started collecting the plates. As I passed behind his chair, he leaned slightly back. His voice dropped low so only I could hear. "You will learn your place," he whispered. The words were soft, but they cut like a blade. I paused, feeling the air grow heavier. For a second, my body wanted to react, to lash out, to shout, but I inhaled, set the plates down, and bent closer as if to hear him better. Then I smiled. Calm, controlled. "We will see," I replied quietly. He blinked, surprised by my answer. He wasn't expecting resistance, not even this small. He smirked again, but there was a flicker of something new in his eyes, unease. I picked up the plates and walked back to the kitchen. My daughter followed me a few minutes later, her voice shaking. "Mama, please, don't make things worse," she said. He can be good. Sometimes." I looked at her, seeing the battle inside, her hope dying, fear growing, but still holding on to scraps of excuses. "I know exactly what he can be," I said softly. "And I know what I can be too." That night, when the house quieted and he disappeared into the bedroom, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty table where he had sat so confidently. I placed my hand on the back of his chair and felt a cold resolve move through me. He thought he had scared me back into silence. He thought he had reminded me of my place. What he did not understand was that silence can be a weapon too, when used by the right person. I had listened. I had watched. I had measured him. And as I washed the last dish, my mind was already somewhere else, on the meal I would cook for him tomorrow, on the plans I would begin to set in motion, on the first quiet step toward his downfall. Because what he did not know was that I had already begun preparing the dinner that would change everything. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was still, wrapped in a silence that felt too fragile to touch. For a long moment, I sat on the edge of my bed, gathering myself. I had not slept much. My mind had been turning all night, building a quiet plan that no one could hear. The bruise on my wrist was darker now, a shadow spreading beneath my skin. I touched it lightly. The pain no longer bothered me. It was the reminder I needed. The hallway floor creaked under my feet as I walked to the kitchen. I moved slowly, careful not to wake them. When I opened the refrigerator, the cold air brushed my face. I began preparing breakfast: eggs, bread, tea. My hands worked automatically. Muscle memory built from years of caring for a family. But inside, everything felt different. I had a new purpose now. I was not just a mother. I was someone who had been wronged. Someone who needed answers. Later that morning, my daughter stood in the doorway, holding her robe closed at her chest. She looked tired. Her hair was messy, her eyes swollen. She did not say, "Good morning." She simply leaned against the frame, watching me. I served her tea, and when she lifted the cup, her sleeve slipped. That was when I saw it: faint bruises around her upper arm. Round, dark, like someone's fingers had been there. She noticed my gaze and pulled her sleeve back quickly. "Don't," she whispered. My chest tightened. For a moment, I could not breathe. "Did he do that?" I asked quietly. She shook her head too fast. "No." I bumped into a cabinet. I reached out, but she stepped back. She was protecting him, or protecting herself, from what would happen if she spoke the truth. Pain rose in my throat, hot and bitter. She was my child. I had held her when she was feverish. I had carried her on my back through crowded streets. I had cried for her future. And now, she stood in front of me, trying to hide wounds she never should have had. I swallowed hard. "Let me see," I said. Her eyes filled. She looked like a little girl again, the one who used to sleep beside me when thunderstorms scared her. Slowly, she lifted her sleeve. The bruises were unmistakable. Not a cabinet, a hand, a grip, fear. I traced one mark gently with my fingertip. She trembled. "Please, Mama," she whispered. "Don't say anything. It will only get worse." Those words, "it will only get worse," settled inside me like a stone. I didn't argue with her. I didn't promise anything. But inside, a line had been drawn. Now, it was not only my dignity he had touched. It was my daughter's safety. And a mother's silence has limits. When she went upstairs, I took out my phone. I photographed my wrist. Then I photographed the edge of the counter where he had pushed me. I took pictures of my daughter's bruises while she slept later that afternoon, her arm exposed in the sunlight. I documented everything carefully. Each image a small piece of truth. I knew I would need it. Evidence is power when words are doubted. I spent the rest of the day gathering more. I searched through drawers. I found messages on her phone, his words, sharp and threatening, disguised as jokes. "Don't embarrass me again. You know what happens when you make me angry. Next time I won't push so lightly." Sickening. He believed those messages were hidden, but they were now in my hands. I called an old friend from the police station. His voice was steady, gentle. I did not tell him everything. I only said enough. He listened. Then he said, "Keep everything. Don't confront him. We can help." I stood at the window after the call, watching the street below. Children played. Cars passed. Life looked ordinary. Yet in my house, something dark had taken root. But I was not helpless. For the first time in a long time, I felt something grow inside me. Not rage, not panic, but clarity. A plan was forming like a storm that gathers slowly, quietly, without sound. When he returned that evening, He walked through the door with the same confidence as always. His shoes scraped against the floor, loud and careless. He smelled faintly of smoke and cologne. My daughter came downstairs immediately, her back straight, her smile forced. She set the table with trembling hands. He kissed her cheek, then looked at me as if nothing had happened yesterday, as if my bruise was invisible, as if his hand had never been on my wrist. We ate dinner in a strange silence. He talked about work, about money, about people who admired him. He laughed loudly at his own stories. My daughter nodded, even when she didn't understand. I watched him closely. I watched the way he chewed, the way he held his fork, the way he leaned back in his chair like a man who believed every room belonged to him. He took a bite of the stew I had prepared. His face softened. "Delicious," he said. "Finally, something done right in this house." I smiled. Calm, controlled. "Thank you," I replied. He didn't know what I had begun. After dinner, he went to the living room, scrolling through his phone. My daughter followed him like a shadow. I cleaned quietly, stacking plates, wiping surfaces. Each movement was slow, intentional. My heart was not racing. I was not afraid. I felt steady, like a string pulled tight enough to be sharp. Later, when everyone else slept, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was silent. A single lamp cast a circle of light around me. I opened my notebook and wrote dates, times, details, everything that had happened, every bruise, every word. Tomorrow would be different. He thought this house was his stage, that we existed to play supporting roles. But he didn't know that I was rewriting the script, and he didn't know what price he would pay for every mark he had ever left on our bodies. Because tonight, as the moon rose and the house drifted into uneasy sleep, I whispered to myself, "It's time." And he had no idea that tomorrow, his kingdom would begin to fall. Morning light crept slowly across the floor, pale and cold. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, both hands wrapped around it for warmth. I didn't drink. I only watched the steam rise. My mind was calm, too calm. When a person reaches a certain age, anger changes shape. It becomes quiet, focused. It learns patience. He woke late. His footsteps were loud on purpose, a warning for everyone in the house. He stretched, yawned, then walked into the kitchen with the confidence of someone who believes the world belongs to him. My daughter followed a few steps behind, eyes lowered, like a shadow trying not to be noticed. "Breakfast?" he asked, without looking at me. I nodded. "Sit. I've already made everything." He sat. Not a single word of gratitude, not a glance. He took a bite of food and hummed with satisfaction. "You cook well," he said. "When you want to." I placed a plate in front of my daughter. She looked exhausted. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the stiffness in her spine. She was waiting for something to happen, though she wasn't sure what. Neither was he. After a few minutes, I set my cup down and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "We are going to the police today." The fork froze halfway to his mouth. My daughter's eyes widened in shock. For a moment, there was absolute stillness in the room, like every sound had been swallowed by the walls. Then he laughed. A loud, dismissive sound. "Police? For what?" I didn't answer with words. I reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder. I laid it on the table between us, slowly, deliberately, like a person placing a blade between enemies. He stared at it. "What's that?" "Open it," I said. His jaw tightened. He reached forward, flipping the cover. Inside were photographs. My bruised wrist, my daughter's arm, screenshots of messages, his threats, his jokes that weren't jokes, his voice recorded while he pushed me. Every page contained truth. His face drained of color. For a moment, He couldn't speak. He stared at the images, his breath shallow. Then he slammed the folder shut and stood up so quickly the chair scraped across the floor. "You're insane," he said. "This means nothing." I looked at him steadily. "It means everything." My daughter pressed a hand over her mouth. He glared at me, shaking with anger he didn't know how to control. The kind of anger that breaks things. The kind of anger that bruises skin. "You're going to regret this," he hissed. "No," I replied softly. "You are." His eyes burned. There was something dangerous in him, something dark. But I didn't step back. I had lived with fear before. I survived it, and I would not kneel to it again. He paced the kitchen, muttering curses. He accused me of ruining the family. He accused me of poisoning my daughter against him. He said I was weak, old, useless. I listened. I did not argue. When his voice finally dropped, I added quietly, "The officers are waiting." He blinked. Confusion flickered across his face. "What do you mean, waiting?" "What I called yesterday." Silence crushed the room. My daughter stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Like she had forgotten who I used to be. A woman with strength. A woman who could protect. He grabbed his keys and walked to the door. Before he could open it, I spoke again. "You should finish your breakfast. It might be a long day." He stopped. His hand froze on the doorknob. For the first time since he entered this house, he didn't know what to do. We rode in the same car. The air inside was thick, suffocating. My daughter sat beside me, twisting her fingers together. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Every traffic light felt endless. Every minute stretched. When we arrived at the station, 2 officers were waiting outside. One of them was my old friend. He greeted me first, then turned to him with a professional, unreadable expression. "We'll need you to come inside," the officer said. "What for?" he snapped, but his voice wavered. "You'll be informed." He looked at me then. Rage, fear, confusion, all mixing behind his eyes. He thought he could talk his way out. He believed charm or intimidation could save him. He didn't know the strength he was facing. We sat in a small interview room. The officers asked questions. My daughter trembled. I held her hand under the table. I answered steadily, clearly. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't dramatize. The truth was enough. He denied everything. He called us liars. He accused us of trying to destroy him. But every lie he threw hit the wall and fell to the floor. The evidence spoke louder than his voice. After an hour, they escorted him to another room. My daughter leaned against me, shaking, tears finally falling. I held her close, stroking her hair like I had when she was a child frightened by thunder. "It will be all right," I whispered. But I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. When we left the station, he was still inside, pacing like an animal behind glass. He shouted after us, but the door closed between us. My daughter turned to me, her voice small. "What happens now?" I looked toward the horizon. The air felt lighter. The world felt wider. There was still danger, still uncertainty, but something had shifted. We were no longer the ones hiding. "What happens now," I said, "is justice." Yet even as I spoke, I knew he would not give up easily. A man like him never accepts defeat without trying to strike back. And he still believed he could escape. He didn't know what I carried in my pocket. A recording he had forgotten about. A truth he could not hide. Tomorrow would bring the real confrontation. The week that followed felt strange. Like the air was made of glass. Every sound was sharp. Every silence was louder than words. He was released while the investigation continued. But something in him had changed. His confidence was cracked, though he tried hard to hide it. He didn't sound like the same man when he called my daughter and demanded a talk. His voice was thinner, stretched. He insisted on coming for dinner. One last dinner. He said he wanted to clear things up between us. I agreed, not because I trusted him, but because I had something he didn't know, something he had forgotten in his arrogance. The recording. That night, I cooked slowly. Every movement was deliberate. I peeled potatoes, chopped vegetables, marinated meat. The cutting board echoed beneath the knife. My daughter sat at the table, watching me. She didn't ask what I was doing. She had learned not to question quiet plans. Her face was pale, her eyes tired, but she helped where she could, setting plates, folding napkins, pouring water into glasses. The house smelled warm, familiar. Yet underneath, there was tension. The walls felt too close, as if they were listening. When the doorbell rang, my daughter flinched. I wiped my hands on my apron and answered it. He stood there, dressed too neatly, hair combed, the smell of cologne settling around him like a disguise. He forced a smile, but his eyes were restless. He scanned the house, searching for danger. He found none. That made him confident again. "Good evening," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I closed the door quietly. "Dinner is ready." At the table, he tried to act like a guest of honor. He laughed too loudly. He complimented the food before even tasting it. He touched my daughter's shoulder with rehearsed tenderness, as if to prove something. "You see?" he said lightly. "We're all together again. Just like before." Before. I watched my daughter lower her gaze. Her fingers tightened around her fork. She did not smile. She did not speak. She was not the same woman who had swallowed her fear in silence. There was something new in her now. Something fragile, but growing. He talked as if nothing had happened. As if the police visit was a misunderstanding. As if bruises faded because they were never real. "People exaggerate," he said, waving his hand. "Women especially. Small things become big things. Feelings take over. But everything can be forgiven if we stay a family." His words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. I set the last dish on the table. Steam rose. The room was quiet again. He raised his glass. "To peace." I didn't raise mine. Neither did my daughter. His smile flickered. We ate. Or rather, he ate. He devoured food like a man who believed he was safe. He praised every bite, his arrogance slowly returning with each swallow. "This is delicious," he said. "Truly. You cook like a queen." Cook. I sat across from him, watching. He had no idea that the kingdom he imagined was already burning. When the plates were nearly empty, he leaned back and spoke softly, almost kindly. "I know things got messy, but let's forget the past. No one needs to get hurt. Not anymore." I reached into my pocket. He watched my hand, confused. "What are you doing?" I placed my phone on the table. I tapped one file. A sound filled the room. His voice. "You will learn your place." The recording was clear. His threat, his push, his cruelty. He froze. My daughter gasped. She had never heard it before. She stared at him with new eyes, eyes that finally saw. The recording continued. His voice mocking, his laugh, his words sharper than knives. The color drained from his face. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked around, desperate, like an animal caught in a trap. "I was angry," he whispered. "You pushed me. You." "No," I said. "You hurt us. And you thought no one would ever see." His hands trembled. He reached for a glass of water, but it slipped and shattered on the floor. The sound was loud, like a gunshot. My daughter jumped back from her chair. He stood slowly, eyes wide. "You don't understand. I can fix this. We can still be a family. Just give me a chance." I said nothing. He looked at us both, panic growing. Please, just talk to me. Don't ruin everything. But something inside me had already settled. I didn't hate him. Hate gives power. What I felt was colder. A decision. A boundary. A truth. I picked up the phone again. We're not the ones who ruined anything. You did. He shook his head, stepping forward. If you go to the police again, we already did. I said quietly. They're coming. They're coming. His breath caught. He stared at me. Then, at my daughter. His face twisted, not with anger now, but fear. A fear he had never felt before. Outside, a car door slammed. Voices approached. His eyes darted toward the window. Toward the front door. Toward escape, he whispered. You can't do this to me. I met his gaze. My voice steady. You did it to yourself. Footsteps reached the porch. He didn't expect who would knock next. The knock on the door was heavy. Steady. Final. For a second. No one moved. The sound echoed through the house like judgment itself. He stood frozen by the dining table, breathing too fast. His hands curled into fists that no longer frightened me. My daughter stared at the door, eyes wide, trembling. She looked like a bird who had lived too long in a cage and suddenly saw the open sky. She didn't know whether to fly or collapse. I wiped my hands on my apron, untied it slowly, and went to the door. When I opened it, the officers stood there. 2 of them. Calm. Professional. My old friend was among them. He nodded once, acknowledging the situation without words. Behind me, I could hear the quick scrape of chair legs. Footsteps. His breath. What do you want? He demanded from the hallway. His voice was tight. You can't just come into my house. It's my house, I said quietly. The officers stepped inside. He backed away from them instinctively. His shoulders hunched, his eyes wild. There's been a misunderstanding, he said. We were having dinner. A family dinner. Everything is fine. My daughter whispered. No, it isn't. Those words seemed to slice through the air. Her voice. Small but steady. A truth finally spoken. He spun toward her. Desperation in his eyes. Don't say things you'll regret. We can fix this. You love me. Remember? You chose me. She shook her head. No, she said. I was afraid of you. The room went silent. He tried to laugh, but it came out broken. I took the phone from my pocket. I tapped the recording again. His voice filled the room. The threat, the shove, the cruelty. There was no question now. No excuses, no doubt. The officers stepped closer. We need you to come with us, one of them said. He backed against the wall, shaking his head. No, no, you can't take me. They're exaggerating. They're lying. Look at them. They're trying to destroy me. My friend, the officer, spoke calmly. There is evidence. There are bruises. There are messages. This is not a misunderstanding. He turned to me, his face twisted with betrayal. How could you do this? He whispered. I met his eyes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply told the truth. You hurt us. You thought no one would dare speak. For a moment, he stood completely still. Not a husband, not a man of power, just a frightened person realizing his control had ended. When the cuffs clicked around his wrists, he flinched. The metal was small, but the sound was enormous. My daughter gasped softly. She covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. He looked at her one last time. Tell them I didn't mean it, he pleaded. Just say it was a mistake. Say it was nothing. She didn't move. Tears ran down her face, but her voice was firm. It wasn't nothing. The officers guided him toward the door. He resisted, then sagged, defeated. Neighbors stood in their yards, watching. Curtains moved. Lights flickered on. The world had eyes now. He shouted, "She's turning you against me. You're all insane." I stepped onto the porch and said quietly, "Enough." He stopped shouting. For a second, he just looked at me. There was something hollow in his stare, as if he was seeing himself for the first time. The mask had fallen, the charm, the arrogance, the loud voice all gone. They led him to the car. He twisted once more, searching for mercy. "Please," he whispered, "don't let them take me." "I didn't take anything from you," I said. "You lost it." The door closed. The engine started. The car drove away into the dark. When I turned back to the house, the silence almost buckled my knees. My daughter stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, shaking. I went to her and held her. She collapsed against me and cried, her tears soaking my shoulder. I held her until her sobs quieted, until her breathing steadied. We went back inside. The plates were still on the table. The food had gone cold. The house felt empty. But for the first time in months, there was no fear inside it. Only stillness. Only relief. My daughter sat down and stared at her hands. "What happens next?" she asked softly. I sat beside her. For a moment, I didn't answer. The question was not simple. There would be paperwork, statements, maybe court. Healing takes time, but the worst part, the silent suffering, was over. "We will rebuild," I said. She looked at me, eyes heavy but clear. "Were you scared?" "Yes," I said. But fear didn't stop me. In that moment, I realized something profound. Power is not always loud. Sometimes it is a woman standing quietly in her kitchen, collecting truth, waiting for the right moment. Sometimes strength looks like evidence, like patience, like a mother who refuses to disappear. The house felt larger now, full of air, full of possibility. My daughter reached across the table and took my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. I squeezed her fingers gently. "We are safe now." But even as I said it, I knew the road ahead would not be easy. Healing is slow. Shadows linger. Memories bruise deeper than skin. Still, I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the night seemed less threatening. The street was calm. Somewhere, a neighbor was closing curtains. Somewhere, someone was washing dishes. Life was continuing. Behind me, my daughter breathed with steady rhythm. For the first time, she looked like she might sleep without fear. Justice had not been loud or dramatic. It had been slow, precise, undeniable. Quiet victory is still victory. Yet in the silence of that night, one question hung in the air, unanswered, trembling like a loose thread. What would tomorrow bring? The morning after his arrest, the house felt different. Lighter, almost fragile, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from the roof and the walls were adjusting to freedom. I walked through each room slowly, touching the furniture, opening windows one by one. Cool air drifted inside. The curtains moved gently. For the first time in a long time, the silence did not hurt. My daughter was still asleep. Her face, for once, looked peaceful. The tightness around her mouth had softened. The dark tension between her brows had eased. She looked younger, like the girl I used to know. I sat beside her for a moment, brushing her hair back from her forehead. She didn't wake. She didn't flinch. She simply breathed, deeply and quietly, as if her body was finally allowed to rest. Downstairs, I boiled water for tea. The kettle whistled softly. The sound was familiar, ordinary, comforting. It amazed me how quickly normal things returned when fear was removed. I poured tea into 2 cups and waited. After some time, I heard footsteps on the stairs. My daughter came down, hair loose, wrapped in a blanket. "Good morning," she whispered. "Good morning," I replied. We sat together at the table, sipping tea. Nothing needed to be said at first. The warmth from the cups felt like medicine. Eventually, she spoke. "I didn't dream last night," she said. Her voice was small, but steady. "I slept. I don't remember the last time I really slept." I reached for her hand. She let me hold it. "We didn't discuss him." "Not yet." His name felt heavy, like something that needed time before it could be touched. The police had called early that morning to confirm he was being processed. There would be reports, statements, perhaps a court date, but those were steps for another day. Today, we needed something else. Peace. Later, we went to the kitchen together. The walls still held the memory of what had happened, so I opened every window. Sunlight poured in. We repainted the room. It was her idea. She chose a soft color, somewhere between white and cream. "I want light," she said. I understood. We worked side by side, rolling paint over old stains, covering the places where shadows used to live. As we painted, she spoke quietly. She told me things I hadn't known. The small moments of cruelty. The sharp words said in private. The nights he had come home angry. The fear that had crept into her bones so slowly, she didn't notice until it owned her. My heart broke with every sentence, but I listened. Listening was the beginning of her release. When the walls dried, the room looked new. The light felt brighter. The air felt wider. She stood in the doorway and smiled for the first time in months. "I want this house to feel safe," she said. "It will," I told her. In the afternoon, we cooked together simple food, nothing special. But the act of preparing a meal, without fear, without watching the clock, without expecting footsteps, that was special. We set the table, ate quietly, and for the first time neither of us flinched at sudden sounds from outside. As evening approached, she sat on the sofa and rested her head on my shoulder. "I didn't know what to do," she whispered. "I thought if I stayed quiet, things would get better." I stroked her hair gently. "Silence never protects us. It only protects those who harm us." She nodded against my shoulder. "I'm not afraid anymore." I believed her. Night fell slowly. We didn't lock every window the way we used to. We didn't check the doors twice. We simply turned off the lights and walked to our rooms. Before I went to bed, I stood alone in the hallway. The house was silent again, but this silence was different. Not heavy, not oppressive. It was soft, resting. I remembered his last words. "Don't let them take me," I whispered into the darkness. "No one is being taken. Only truth is being seen." In my room, I lay under the blankets, listening to the steady sound of my daughter breathing in the next room. I closed my eyes. The bruise on my wrist had begun to fade. The ache was almost gone. It would heal. We would heal. Justice had not come with shouting or rage. It had come quietly, like dawn. Before sleep found me, I knew one simple thing with absolute certainty. No one should be afraid in their own home, and no one who hurts others should ever sleep easily. Tomorrow, life would begin again. No one should ever be afraid in their own home, and no one who harms others should ever sleep easily.